Back in the 1980s, one small company insisted that a strange radio technology, which almost the entire industry had dismissed as impractical and perhaps even impossible to actually build, was going to be the real future of the mobile phone. Everyone else, meanwhile, was busy standardizing on something completely different. And so it went ahead and bet the whole company on being right. And today, that company quietly collects a small fee on very nearly every single smartphone that is sold anywhere on the entire planet. This is the story of Qualcomm. Here is the pattern worth learning. Call it proving the impossible and then owning the standard. Because when the whole herd is stampeding hard in one direction and you happen to be deeply convinced that the doubted and the difficult idea is actually the far better one, you must not simply stand there and argue about it. You must go out and actually prove it in the cold, hard, real world. Because if you can somehow make the impossible thing genuinely work, it can then become the standard that everyone else is forced to build upon. And whoever it was that first proved it comes to own it. So travel back to the late 1980s. The whole mobile industry was going digital and it was converging, very fast indeed, onto one single approach. Over in Europe, an entire continent was busy mandating one shared standard, a system that neatly divided the invisible airwaves up by time. It all looked completely settled. It genuinely looked like the future. But one small company had a very different and a far stranger idea indeed. A technique known as code division. Instead of dividing the airwaves up by time, it would let a great many calls all share the very same airwaves at once, with each individual call quietly tagged by its own unique private code. Its backers boldly claimed that it could carry several times as many calls in the very same slice of precious spectrum. And most of the industry simply scoffed at the whole idea. It was, they insisted, far too complex and quite unproven, and perhaps just flatly impossible to ever actually build for a real phone network. And here, now, was the great fork in the road. The safe and the sensible path was really quite obvious. Simply join the herd. Build the chips for that one standard that the entire world was already busy adopting, and quietly become one more perfectly respectable supplier among many. Or, instead, bet the entire company on proving that the very thing everyone else was busy mocking could actually be made to work. And it chose to go and prove it. In 1989, it partnered up with a big telephone operator and it built real, working, test networks right out in the real world, first in San Diego and then over in New York. And the thing actually worked. That supposedly impossible technology carried the calls, exactly as it had been promised all along. And the doubters, quite suddenly, all went very quiet. And from that one single proof, the technology simply began to spread. All through the middle of the 1990s, it was formally written into an official industry standard, and real commercial networks began to switch on. And then came the truly decisive moment of all. Because when the whole world finally sat down to design the very next generation of mobile, the third generation, it chose to build that entire future directly on top of code division. Even the great rival camp, the very one that had bet so heavily against it, now had to quietly adopt the exact technology that it had once so confidently dismissed. And here is precisely where all of that quiet genius finally pays off. Because that technology was now baked directly into the global standard itself, Qualcomm's patents had suddenly become genuinely essential. Anybody at all, building a modern phone anywhere on Earth simply had to use them. And so Qualcomm licensed them all out in exchange for a small running royalty, one calculated on the price of the whole entire phone. Critics grumbled loudly and called it the Qualcomm tax. But it now quietly earns on very nearly every smartphone on the planet, no matter whose chips happen to be sitting inside. Now imagine, instead, that it had simply gone and followed the herd and built only for that standard everyone else was adopting. It would then have been just one more chip supplier among a whole crowd of others, contributing precisely nothing that the standard could not have easily gotten from somebody else. There would have been no essential patents at all, no royalty on the whole phone, and no tax. It would have simply competed on price forever on the very thinnest of margins. The entire fortune existed, in the end, only because it had gone and built the one single thing that the standard could not possibly do without. Now, in all fairness, that royalty model has been fought over, very fiercely indeed, in courtrooms right around the whole world. Rivals and regulators alike have challenged it again and again and again. But in the end, and in the very highest courts, the core of the model has largely and quietly held. It was contested, bitterly, but it endured. Look back then at the true shape of the whole thing. This company did not win by ever being the biggest or the loudest voice in the room. It won purely by being willing to become the lonely little heretic, to bet boldly on the doubted idea, and then to go and do all of that hard and unglamorous work of actually proving it, until the whole wide world was finally left with no real choice at all but to build directly on top of the very thing that it had made. So here is the lesson worth keeping. The next time that the entire herd is stampeding, loudly and confidently, in one single direction, and you find yourself quietly and stubbornly convinced that the difficult, doubted idea is in truth the far better one, do not merely stand around arguing about it. Ask yourself, instead, as honestly as you possibly can, could you go and actually prove it so completely and so utterly undeniably that one day the whole world is simply forced to come and build itself on top of you?